Welcome to this very first video dealing with reading assignment 1 for scientific communication in English. When we look at the reading assignment, we see that we're going to open the text Working in Groups Identification and Treatment of Students' Perceived Weaknesses. The first question that we'll deal with is we're going to look at a paragraph starting with the student's attitude is on page 11 that we find here, and we're mainly going to look at the function of the first sentence. So the first sentence, and then also we're going to look what specific word reoccurs throughout the paragraph and is going to structure both the paragraph and is linked to this first sentence. Let's take a look at the text itself. Page 11 we have here in our text, and here is the paragraph that we're going to talk about. Let's read the first sentence together. A student's attitude is an important component of how well the student gains knowledge and develops skills. To put this into context, this is a paper looking into how students work in groups and how they feel about that, how they develop skills to manage those. So let's take a look at that sentence. A student's attitude is an important component of how well the student gains knowledge and develops skills. The clear focus is that we will focus on student first, related to his attitude, and then how that student gains knowledge and skills. In other words, we're going to link attitude and say that the attitude of the student is important to see how that student is going to acquire new knowledge and how he or she is going to develop skills. Let's now read the rest of the paragraph and see how the first sentence relates. A curriculum addressing all three components, attitudes, knowledge, and skills, is required by the American Assembly of Collegiate Schools of Business. Attitudes can impact performance, but we have little data on what students' attitudes are towards groups. So what we already find is that here we've got attitude in our first sentence, and that the word attitude reoccurs as the next focus. We're going to link attitude to knowledge and skills, and in the next sentence we're going to put that into context, saying that the curriculum, what we study, has to have three components, and seemingly attitudes, knowledge and skills, all three together are what make up a good curriculum. And in the first sentence we're going to say that attitude is going to be defining on how students acquire knowledge and skills. But then we're going to zoom in, because we're going to say, well, attitudes, so providing more information, attitudes can impact performance, but we have little data on what students' attitudes are towards groups. So we're going to say that we know that attitudes impact performance, but what we do not yet know, where there's a gap in our knowledge, is how attitudes is going to work versus groups. Most teachers believe that students don't dislike working in groups, and we see that we take up this idea that we've introduced here, the notion of groups, and then we're going to develop that idea by saying, well, students don't seem to dislike groups according to teachers. However, we're going to provide contrast. Given the popularity of group assignments that frequently require out-of-classroom meetings and the pre-existing multiple demands on students' time, common sense would indicate that students do find the demands of group assignments challenging at best. So, as we're zooming in, we're going to go from attitudes towards group work, and we're going to start with what we already know, namely that most teachers think it's okay, but since we know that many assignments are given, common sense would say that people still find group assignments challenging, and we introduce the idea of a problem of challenge, and we take that up in our next sentence. When a challenging demand is combined with an unsuccessful experience, for instance assignment with conflicting personality types, social loafers, or reluctance to differ with domineering would-be leaders, frustration with less competent classmates, etc., students could be easily discouraged by their own trial and error attempts to cope, and their attitudes towards groups, and we see where we come down, starting off with attitudes impacting knowledge and skills, and we're going to focus on group skills and how problems that can occur could hamper or could keep students' performance back in their relation, how they deal with groups, and we see that in negative wording, they yield unsatisfactory results. From unsatisfactory, we want to try and solve that problem. We say classroom instruction might foster more successful experiences, helping students cope, and we see that the word cope recurs, first in a negative and here in a more positive context. Final sentence here, poor attitudes, again that structuring word. We're going to see how we're going to kind of summarize the entire text. More info and more summaries in the next video.